Matthew was a bad dude, and he chose to be a bad dude.
Yeah.
And Jesus looked at him and said, not only like I'll eat dinner with you, and like Zacchaeus, like, right.
Yeah.
Not only did he ask to be invited to his house and redeem him the way that he did with Zacchaeus, but he actually said, you're going to come and you're going to be one of my bros.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're going to be in my closest circle.
Yeah. And
you're going to be tasked with going out into the world after I'm done and representing me.
Yeah. All right, everyone, welcome back to Pray Tell with Tyler and Trevor. We are two people at St. Matthew's Anglican Church in Abbotsford, and we like to do this podcast to talk about some things that make the Anglican Church and the Anglican tradition unique, and just trying to demystify maybe some of the aspects of going to a more liturgical church for people that aren't familiar with it. And so today, in light of that, we are going to be talking about Saint Matthew, the actual saint for whom our parish is named, because the feast day of Saint Matthew is coming up on the 21st of September. So we want to explore that topic a little bit and learn a little bit about Saint Matthew.
Yeah, and sometimes, the idea of saints can be a little opaque, hard to understand. Definitely when I came into the Anglican Church from an evangelical, more free church model, I associated saints with the Catholic Church and with stodgy or unclear situations about, well, what's their status and why do we have them and all those things. But over the years, it's been helpful to recognize that, there's these significant people within the history of the church that have been an important part of shaping it, sometimes for the miraculous things they do, sometimes because of the important role they took in organizing certain things or particular piety they had, and remembering and recognizing and learning from those people throughout history can be very helpful because sometimes you need models, and there's no shortage of them.
Yeah. I like learning about medieval history. And so one of the podcasts I like to listen to is about that topic. And I was listening to one recently where they were saying saints were kind of like the rock stars of the Middle Ages and the early church. Like, people just revered them because of the associated miracles or great things that they did. And so we often just don't know about that nowadays because we're so far removed from most of these people that lived 1,000 years ago or hundreds of years ago.
Yeah.
And so learning about St. Matthew gives us an opportunity to reconnect a little bit with that tradition and history.
So in terms of who St. Matthew was, there's the very obvious answer, I suppose, in the sense that, well, we have this gospel that was written by him. We have stories throughout the four gospels that talk about Matthew being one of Jesus' disciples, one of the, in his core group that walked around with him and ministered with him and learned from him during his lifetime, and obviously was an important person within the first 40 or 50 years probably of the existence of the church after Jesus' death.
And we often remember that Matthew in the Gospels, he's a tax collector. So he's part of this group of people in the ancient world at that time who were just kind of reviled by most of Jewish society because these tax collectors worked on behalf of the Romans, who were the invading conquerors, right? And so he, being a Jewish man working for the Romans, is kind of like a traitor, yet he still manages to respond to the call of Jesus and join him and follow him.
Well, and not only that, but the controversy of Jesus calling him to come and follow him, because while the tax collectors were agents of the state, which is bad enough, they were also just straight up scumbags. They would collect more than what they were due so that they could pocket the rest, and became quite wealthy off of their brothers and sisters. Doubly bad.
Yeah.
Very controversial for
Yeah.
Jesus to not just call him, but even to associate with him, with his message of freeing the oppressed and being and releasing the prisoners and all those things.
Yeah. And it's interesting that we have this story in the Gospels of Zacchaeus, who's this also a tax collector, kind of like this good stand-in for Matthew of just what you were saying. Like even someone so hated as him is not too far, far at all from being called to God and following. And
particularly on point in history, that when there's especially for the early saints, they were often associated with a certain type of people, and they would be the patron saint of that group. And Matthew ended up being appointed or designated as the patron saint of the money people, the bankers, the accountants, money changers, things like that, as a way to, a person for them to look up to in certain ways, I suppose.
Yeah. And we have quite a lot of interesting information and questions to work through today. But maybe before that, Tyler, can you tell us about the beer that you brought tonight?
Yes.
Or the drink?
It's a drink, yeah. Yep. So I went to Loudmouth Brewing Co. Here in Abbotsford and got a growler full of their pineapple lemonade seltzer. We've both been there before, and they make possibly the meanest burger in Abbotsford. I went there 2 days ago and had a burger with deep fried pickles, and they were just stellar.
Yeah.
They don't put their stuff out very widely. It's you basically go there to get, if you want something to go, you can take it out in a growler. And so got some of that. We can't crack the growler. That would be messy. But we can definitely take a twist and pour out some and enjoy that. I did make a bit of a mess. That was a good sound for a recording.
Cheers.
Cheers to St. Matthew's Day.
Yeah.
It is a hot day today in Abbotsford. It was like 34 today.
Yeah.
So this is particularly refreshing on such a hot day.
I appreciate that the pineapple flavor is not like overwhelming because I'm not the biggest pineapple fan.
Same.
And this is good. So
nice and fruity and tangy and sour. Lovely.
Yeah.
So Trevor, I kind of teed up before some of the perceptions I had of saints and patron saints and those types of things already. But what was your experience growing up and coming into the Anglican Church?
I had a very limited understanding of saints or knowledge. And I'd say I still don't have like a great knowledge of it now. But when I think back to being a kid, like what did I know about saints? I think the main thing that really sticks out to me is there's two things. One, my best friend, on the way to his house, we would pass an Anglican church called St. Michael the Archangel, or St. Michael and All Angels, or something like that.
Yeah.
And then on the way to the church that I grew up going to, there was a St. Luke's. So like those are the two saints that I kind of probably knew about the most, but do I know anything about them? No. Other than, Luke is, one of the Gospels and Michael is one of the angels, I think, mentioned somewhere in the Bible, but like really limited knowledge. Maybe since joining and attending St. Matthew in an Anglican church, because the Anglican Church of Canada, I believe, or maybe it's the Anglican Communion, like Worldwide Communion, I think their flag is the flag of St. George. And there's like a
Church
whole,
of England.
the Church of England. Yeah. And so I think I've learned a little bit just about like who St. George is. And so I have like a little understanding of that, but like otherwise not a whole lot in my experience.
And I think for myself, I'm in the same boat. And I think that's partially a function of just the fact that I've never been a part of, an Anglican church that has a very high church tradition. It's been relatively low church in the sense that it doesn't pay a lot of attention to saints and sainthood, and like it's certainly a part of the tradition, but like I at St. Matthew's or at any other Anglican church I've been to, there's been no tradition of revering or praying to the saints, or like they're an exemplar, but not one that, in my view, is paid a lot of attention to. At least in the regular services. Now there are some Anglican churches that do like very closely celebrate saints' days, and we adopt some of that at St. Matthew's, and having celebrating our Saints' Day, St. Matthew's Day.
We have St. Nicholas Fair in December.
Yeah, so some of those things come up every now and then, but it's not a regular part of what we do in services or what's preached about or anything like that, which I think wouldn't be bad for that to happen with the right tone and spirit. But it's not an active part of what we learn about or anything like that.
One of the things, if I'm ever reading on maybe like Wikipedia about a particular saint, because maybe I've read about it or heard about it somewhere, is at some point in the article, it'll say this saint is revered in the Catholic Church and the Anglican Church and maybe somewhere else. And I'm like, really? The Anglican Church? Like, I wouldn't have known that.
Right.
Like, of course, the Catholic Church, because it's all the saints in the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
But the Anglican Church doesn't always, I think, even have all the same saints necessarily. And if the ones that they do, it like you're saying, we're not always aware of who they are because we don't celebrate them the same way anymore.
Yeah. Which is kind of fine with me.
Yeah.
I'll be curious if some of that changes with our new priest, right? Former Franciscan and former Catholic.
Yeah, there certainly could be some of that. And obviously being ordained within a particular order historically. See how that plays out.
Yeah.
Be interesting. Yeah.
Tyler, do you want to talk a little bit about like the author of the Gospel of Matthew, maybe kind of like the historical beginnings of this gospel that's named after Matthew?
Sure. So traditionally, and I think it's fairly accurate to say that Matthew's gospel was written generally for a Jewish audience, right? He was trying to tell the story of who Jesus is for the Jewish people in their time and setting. It wasn't the earliest written gospel. It was written a little bit later, but seems to have somewhat of a distinct audience in that sense. Matthew does a lot of work in his gospel to have Jesus commenting and saying things that would remind us, the reader, of Moses and significant events within the Jewish history. Most commonly, we focus on Matthew during Advent and Christmas because he has one of the two nativity stories within the gospel, and so we focus a lot there. And Matthew wants to line Jesus really closely up with the Davidic lineage, establishing generally his place within that line, but then also with the Sermon on the Mount and Jesus' statement of the Beatitudes in Matthew's gospel, we see him acting very much like Moses.
Yeah.
And so you have these kind of Matthew trying to line him up with these Jewish saints in a certain respect, just to establish that who he is and what he's done through his death and through his resurrection. So that's fairly distinct within the gospel tradition. There's certainly parts of Matthew's gospel that are consistent or the same, very similar stories as what would it be in Luke's gospel or Mark's or John's, but taking a bit of a different angle.
Yeah. And on that line of thought there, from what I understand and have read, Matthew actually reproduces or maybe even outright just borrows from the Gospel of Mark, like the majority of it, and then adds some of his own stuff too.
Yeah.
So traditionally, the Gospel of Mark, we think, is the first gospel written, and then Matthew and Luke based their retelling of the story of Jesus on that. But then there's also like maybe this other source that we don't know about that they possibly used.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting if you find that kind of thing, like gets your brain working, and like you're like, oh, that, like there's so much to get into with kind of the historic background to the how these were written, and just the fact that we have this gospel named after Matthew, but most likely was written by an anonymous person, because I think, again, from what I understand, is it was fairly common at the time to attribute important writings to, a well-known figure. And that's maybe what happened here. And yeah, there's disagreement about that depending where you are, but it seems like the consensus is fairly strong that, yeah, it's probably an anonymously written letter attributed to Matthew. And a lot of it's based on Mark. And as you said, like it's really about establishing kind of the authority of Jesus by linking it back to Moses and that tradition, that line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like those discussions about authorship and origins and who borrowed from who is a very important academic discussion. But I mean, what I often come back to is just the simple fact that like we don't have any original manuscripts of any of the New Testament or Old Testament writings. We have bits and pieces of some very old versions of those texts that have been copied time after time after time.
Yeah.
There were no printing presses.
Yeah.
Things were hand copied on papyrus, scrolls of paper that were far from perfect. If they were copied, they may not have been copied in whole form because that was pretty expensive to do.
Yeah.
It took a lot of resources and a lot of time. And obviously, when you are hand printing things over and over again, errors tend to get introduced into the manuscripts because that's how humans work.
Yeah.
And professional scribes would be very good at not making those mistakes, but they still tended to happen.
Yeah.
And you can see those when you compare manuscripts that we have over the centuries. We are, the Bible that we have in our pews or on our desk, in our desk drawers, whatever it is, we've received them. We've received tradition. And one of those traditions is that Matthew, the disciple of Matthew wrote the gospel. There's probably some evidence within the text itself, if you compare them, that not everything was written by Jesus the disciple.
Yeah.
We don't know. It's not that it's impossible to know, but it's not often a very functional discussion, I find, when we're talking about living and faith and trying to be faithful to what is in the text.
Yeah.
When I was doing my biblical studies degree, and specifically like doing like Greek and Hebrew studies, we would have our Greek and Hebrew Bible, and at the bottom of every page, it would talk about the manuscripts that we had available for these certain texts. And there was always 2 or 3 that we had really good versions of that were, the best ones were from like the 9th century AD. That's 900 years after Jesus lived.
Yeah.
So that's a long time.
And I think the oldest known copy of the Gospel of Matthew is from something like the 2nd or 3rd century.
Yeah.
And it's a fragment, like it's a piece.
It's a little piece.
And the fact that it has survived 1900 years is incredible. And that in itself is excellent evidence that this is a very old book that like wasn't just made up by someone in the 6th century, which of course happened. Like people would do that because they want to try to write something that has authority, maybe for good or bad reasons, whatever it was. But yeah, we there's a lot of faith and trust that goes into just receiving the words that are in the text, and we receive that because we not blindly trust, but we trust the tradition that we're given, and we got to engage with something.
And it's not our only access to the divine, but it's an important one. That's for sure.
Was that ever challenging for either of you guys when you confronted some of that initial evidence? It throws a lot of things into question too.
Yeah.
At this point in the conversation, our hosts took a rather spirited detour. The content was delightful, but decidedly off-topic. This tangent shall be released in its full glory soon, so stay tuned for that special bonus. And now we return you to your regularly scheduled conversation.
Question 2. And I think this is like not related at all to textual criticism anymore, but has more to do with, when we see depictions of Matthew as a saint, there's kind of similar imagery that's been ascribed to him over the years. He's usually symbolized as a winged man, which seems weird. Apparently, from what I can tell, representing the human side of Jesus.
I don't get it.
Feels off.
Yeah.
Well, I think we have depictions of St. Matthew with wings in our stained glass windows. But the humanity of Jesus is a very important theme within the Gospel of Matthew, and it kind of carries through to his depictions within our tradition. I'm just reading here. While the wings represent divine inspiration, it's like saying that while Matthew wrote about Jesus' life on earth, he was guided by God to do so. Producer Paul, when you were looking at some of the images, like, was there anything that popped out for you about those depictions of Saint Matthew? I
think what's maybe revealing is how some of the other authors are represented. So, like, for example, you have Mark represented as a winged lion.
Ooh, that's cool.
Isn't there like a mythical animal that's a winged lion?
Yes.
Gryffindor.
Well, that's what I was thinking, but a griffin is a bird, and
griffin.
Gryffindor.
No, but like,
Griffin.
Okay. There
Insert Dwight Schrute being Gryffindor in his sumo suit. Gryffindor! Please do that.
Is this an image of St. Matthew with wings or St. Matthew with a man, like a winged man?
I think it is a portrait of St. Matthew with wings.
Okay.
But I think the idea is that it's revealing something unique about Christ.
Right.
Do you know what symbolism is associated with John and Emily?
St. John's symbol is an eagle.
They already have wings.
They do.
A winged eagle.
Winged eagle.
Seems normal.
Luke is represented by a winged ox. So the wings are a theme.
That was Luke?
That was Luke.
Who was the Gryffindor?
That was Mark.
Oh.
Gryffindor. We do really like Harry Potter.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
I think we talked a little bit about feast days earlier in the year because we were talking about how it was like they happened all the time because there were so many saints. Like people would just, multiple times a month would be having a feast of insert name of saint here. But we don't do that in the same way anymore. It's not like a stop everything you're doing and celebrate this saint and have a big meal with the whole community. We do it quite differently now, and it doesn't necessarily, maybe it even has a different meaning today because of the nature of how we live in the 21st century.
Yeah, and we don't have, who has the time?
Yeah. We celebrate the big ones because that's all we have.
And the big ones are mainly focused around Jesus.
Yeah.
Easter, Christmas. There are others like All Saints Day, day after Halloween.
Yeah.
Yeah. That one has a particularly kind of notable place in the church year, at least at St. Matthew's for church. And St. Matthew's Day.
Yeah.
And even St. Matthew's Day this year doesn't fall on the Sunday that we're celebrating it.
Yeah.
It's a couple days before, but it's very normal for special Sundays like that. For special days like that, you would just kind of bump it forward as opposed to, because it has a specific day within the church calendar.
So St. Matthew's feast day traditionally was celebrated to or marked to celebrate Matthew's transformation from being this tax collector to a follower of Jesus and a disciple. And it's kind of this reminder that no one is beyond the reach of God's love, and that even someone as hated as the tax collector, as we said earlier, can do great things and totally change their path.
Yeah, and like hated for, like there were different types of people within Jesus' day who were despised for various kinds of reasons, right? There were like people who were unclean, like lepers, for example, who just couldn't be around in the community because they would get everyone else sick.
Yeah.
Right? They were hated, quote unquote, for a much different reason than a tax collector was. Yeah. And so I think it's important to draw out that distinction of this was maybe,
that was more of like a ritual.
Well, it was. Ways. So there were I think there were some that were like purely ritual. But leprosy was like real. Like if you got too close to them, you'd catch it and you'd lose limbs. Like that's not good. They should go over there.
Yeah.
But there were some other ritual uncleanness within the Jewish tradition, especially in first century Judaism, where it was not as significant, like physically.
Yeah.
and then there were other types of uncleanness or outcasts who were outcasts politically or because of a class system, like a tax collector, right? They were unclean, not in a religious or spiritual sense, or in a physical illness sense. They were unclean because they were the stooge of the oppressor, and they were
traitors.
And they were traitors is the perfect word for it. But we have this example here of how that version, and of course, in that example, as a tax collector, to some degree, they chose to do that, which is the worst. Most people didn't choose to get leprosy.
No.
Most people didn't choose to be spiritually or ritually unclean.
Or a Samaritan or something.
Or a Samaritan. They were that because of circumstances they were in, either for the long term or short term. But Matthew chose to do that. But he was redeemed in a significant way. And that's worth celebrating, remembering. Because we're all in that situation at one time or another.
Yeah.
Very likely. And so that's worth thinking about.
So at St. Matthew, do we do anything in particular on the Sunday or closest to the feast day? Do we do special prayers? Do we have a certain readings connected? Like what marks St. Matthew's day in our calendar as being unique, other than the fact that that's who our parish is named after?
I think in the past, if I remember right, we've used our gospel reading would be from the Gospel of Matthew. Usually the homily / sermon would be kind of themed around the person and saint of Matthew. And then we would have just a celebration, have a cake and it's a occasion to mark, to call attention to. And so, when we have St. Matthew's Day, it's not like we spend the day reminiscing. It's just a moment to mark, and in many ways a very innocent celebration of, this is our saint's day. And so this is who we are, and we're gonna have a cake and barbecue some hot dogs and have a good time.
We like to gather. Yeah. Is there a way that we can maybe take the example of Matthew, the story of Matthew, and like how can that apply to our own faith or our own learning in life? Like why even bother celebrating saints like Matthew or Francis or whoever?
Yeah,
because they're just old guys that have been dead for a long time.
Or old women.
There are saintly women too. Many female saints. Yeah, like Saint Cecilia.
Yeah,
that's the first one that comes to mind.
I bet there's a Saint Agnes.
Oh, 100%.
I don't know for sure, but I bet there is.
We have a number of churches in the Diocese of New Westminster named after female saints, don't we? I'm sure we do.
Yeah, there used to be a Saint Margaret in Abbotsford.
Yes, yeah, you had mentioned that. But I'm sure I've seen a few.
There is a Saint Agnes, by the way. Agnes of Rome.
Yeah.
In case you're wondering.
Anyway.
Fact check.
Thank you, producer Paul. I think like in terms of St. Matthew, I think there's real, it kind of goes back to what I said before. This person was not just an outcast. They were a deplorable.
Yeah.
4 years ago, that would have been a very politically charged word, but they were deplorable. He was the worst. If you go back, and I think we've talked about this multiple times on this podcast, in terms of the socio-political setting that they're in, with the Romans coming in, setting up their stooge of a Jewish king, Herod, in the area, and his offspring, and ruling the way that they did. Matthew was a bad dude, and he chose to be a bad dude.
Yeah.
And Jesus looked at him and said, not only like I'll eat dinner with you, and like Zacchaeus, like, right?
Yeah.
Not only did he ask to be invited to his house and redeem him the way that he did with Zacchaeus, but he actually said, you're going to come and you're going to be one of my bros.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're going to be in my closest circle.
Yeah.
And you're going to be tasked with going out into the world after I'm done and representing me.
Yeah.
And he did that in terms of the politically, he did that to one of the worst candidates for that whatsoever.
Yeah.
And of course, we are not privy to all kinds of conversations, and
I'm sure it was messy.
I'm sure it was messy. But he brought them together, and he brought Matthew into the fold. And there are he wasn't the only controversial figure in that group by any means. But in terms of what Jesus communicated by doing that, I think was very significant. And we can think a lot about who we exclude or can exclude or tend to exclude from our churches and buildings and clubs and groups and all those things, and say, well, maybe we can think about that a little more carefully.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me a little bit of how each Sunday when we do the prayers of the people, like, despite how you feel about our political leaders in Canada and British Columbia and Abbotsford, we pray for them every week that they will make the right decisions and be guided the best they can by the people around them and by the Spirit of God.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Our last question here is, do you have a patron saint or a saint that resonates with you? And for me personally, I would say, no, not really. But one that I think I forgot this until just a few moments ago. Saint Christopher is the patron saint, probably of more than just this, but the patron saint of travelers, people who are on the road, and people, I guess predominantly Catholics who are traveling or feel a connection to Saint Christopher will have like a Saint Christopher medallion that they might keep with them or hang somewhere. And I always thought that was quite interesting. I liked that, that idea of having a patron saint of traveling or being on the road, because like that takes up so much time in people's lives. And you probably experience a little bit of that. You're on the road a bit more these days, seems like, eh?
Yeah, it's been, especially the summer, just traveling around for summer trips and things like that. Well, I think the most culturally famous saint would be St. Patrick. Probably. I think it's the only regular occurrence of a saint's day in the calendar, in the regular person's calendar.
Or Valentine's Day. St.
Valentine's. Adjacent. It's very saint adjacent, I would say. So I have two stories.
Yeah.
One is when I was living in Newfoundland. I was living in Bay Roberts, Newfoundland. And we did an exchange trip for minor hockey.
Mm.
So I was playing minor hockey, and I think I was in Bantam or Pee Wee. For those of you who don't know, those are different stages within minor hockey in Canada. and we did an exchange trip with a group of students that played out of Pierrefonds in Quebec, Montreal, like basically a suburb of Montreal. Yeah. So we went there for like a week, and when we were there, we went to this, I believe it was a Catholic church, probably a very famous one. I couldn't even tell you what it's called. I was 12.
Is this outside of Quebec City or Montreal?
Montreal.
Okay.
So I think it was up on a big hill. Okay. No idea.
Probably Montreal, because there's a hill.
It was Montreal. It for sure was in Montreal, but I don't know. I don't remember what it's called. But we walked in there, and there were relics, and there were like, and I was, at the time, I was a 12 or 13, went to a Pentecostal church. All the Catholic kids that I went to school with were did not seem like Christians, although they very clearly were Catholic.
Yeah.
And so my view of Catholics was very skewed. And so I went to this Catholic church, and there was like, fonts for blessing yourself and crossing yourself. And there were like, it was like a museum we were walking through. Yeah. It was a massive church. And we went to the store that was there. I bought this little Saint Benedict medallion. And then the person who was in there said, "Oh, you can take this over to the priest and get it blessed. And then you'll have a blessed little thing, and it'll be good luck." And so I remember I kept this Saint Benedict medallion I wore it for a long time, because I was like, well, this priest blessed it. Like, that's pretty cool. I don't know what it means. And eventually it kind of like, it was kind of cheap. So the metal loop kind of sheared off, and I just lost the medallion. But that's my earliest memory of interacting with any sort of saint, was Saint Benedict. When we started going to the Anglican Church in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, that church is called St. Aidan, and it's named after Aidan of the island of Lindisfarne, which is a little island in the UK. And I believe Aidan and his group were from Ireland, I believe. And these Irish saints eventually came and like saved the Britons, like from themselves, because they needed Jesus at this stage. It was a long time ago. And so they came to this island, and the Isle of Lindisfarne is very unique, if I remember right, because it, when the tide's in, it's isolated from the rest of the mainland.
Yeah.
And when it's out, you can access. And so they made a monastery there, these monks led by Aidan, and they created a very, they used that as part of their daily ritual, right? It was a positive thing for them that at some points they were isolated from the rest of the people they were ministering from, because they could kind of go inward. And there were times where they could access them, and so they would go out and minister and then come back. And that is, there's a very rich tradition of prayer and worship based on the Isle of Lindisfarne. And I think to this day you can go there, and there's a monastery there, and it's a very, very cool place. But yeah, that'd be my two stories about saints. Yeah. St. Aidan, St. Benedict.
In Canada, like, there are obviously modern day saints too. Like, I think Pope John Paul is now a saint. Or
on
the way to
on the way to. There's some process. Yeah.
Is Mother Teresa now a saint?
I don't think so.
I'm not sure.
But
even like going back into the 20th century and the 19th century, like, we have saints that have people that have been sainted in that time. Lindisfarne, your story about that reminded me of when my wife and I went to France a number of years ago, and we went to Mont Saint Michel, which is exactly the same. When the tide's in, you can't get to the mainland, but when it goes out, like, there's only a certain time of the day when you can get to the church and to the point or whatever. So yeah, very cool.
Very cool. I don't know of any churches like that in Canada.
No. And those points were kind of disconnected, but that's okay.
That's all right.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this this wide-ranging, sometimes meandering, often meandering episode of Pray Tell.
Yeah.
And we hope that if you're in the area, you consider joining us for a Sunday morning service. We recently, as of September 8th, have started meeting at 10 a.m. On Sunday mornings.
Yeah.
We have been 11 a.m. for quite a while, but we are now meeting again at 10 a.m. So please, if you're around or you want to check us out, come on a Sunday morning to St. Matthew's at 2010 Guilford Drive. For 10 a.m., you'll be met by greeters. You'll see lots of friendly faces. You'll probably see Tyler or myself there. And we like to have coffee and snacks afterwards. So if anything, come for that.
Yeah.
And we'd love to see visitors who are around and want to check us out. Any final words?
And if you have a favorite saint, comment below. That would be great. We'd love to see. And if you have any topics for us, beverages to drink, we would gladly take your recommendations and questions down in the comments. Let us know. We're happy to engage with those, and we look forward to seeing those comments in the future.
Thank you.
Thanks. That's all the 4 Gospels?
Yeah.
That horse has a halo.